If the New York Giants fall to the Philadelphia Eagles on Thursday night, will there be winds of change sweeping through East Rutherford? Locked On Giants starts right now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on this side, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, we're pleased to welcome on in Ed Valentine of Big Blue View, old friend. And I do mean old. Sorry, Ed, I had to get that in. Sorry, Ed. Anyway, we welcome on in Ed Valentine. We're going to talk about the state of the Giants. The Giants are at sort of a crossroad here where they're coming off a very bad loss to the New Orleans Saints, a game they probably should have won. They didn't win, and that has once again spoke the fires, if you will, about where do the Giants go from here, especially with the Eagles coming in, a team that is expected to kind of blast the Giants into the next county by the time Thursday Night Football is over. So, Ed, let's get into it. Do you agree that the Giants are kind of at a crossroads here, that as their season just continues to slip away from them?
Absolutely, Patty. There's no probably about the fact that they should have beaten the Saints. No probably about that at all. It was clear that the Giants had the better football team. They didn't play the better football, but it was clear that they had the better football team. And think about last year. This game against the Saints is a lot like the game against the Carolina Panthers. It was a game that had to be won, needed to be won, was probably the game against the weakest team on your schedule. And the Giants laid an egg. They went out there and they basically put the win in a nice, neat little box and gift wrapped it and put a bow on it and walked it across the field and handed it to Kellen Moore. And here, have your first victory. We don't want it. And, there's no doubt that they're at a crossroads, Patty. They should be better than they are. You're 1-4, and you're at that point where you're looking at the season and you're thinking, again, we're staring down the barrel of a 3 or 4 win season, the way things are going. And something has to change, and you don't know what it's going to be.
Ed, why aren't they better than they are, given the talent that they have? I mean, we can point to the mistakes, obviously, but I suspect there's a deeper reason. And I'm just wondering, what's your take on what that reason might be?
Patty, if I had the answer to that, I would be banging on John Mara's door and looking for Joe Schoen's job. But look, it's bad football teams, badly run organizations, when you make mistakes in roster management, when you make mistakes in the draft, when you make mistakes in free agency, when you make mistakes in hiring, they all come back to roost in one way or another. And you look at every Giants loss and it all has its own story, but sometimes it's the players, sometimes it's the roster, sometimes it's the coaching decisions. The one thing that I will agree with when Brian Daboll talks is, everybody has a hand in it. But it's not just the players, it's not just the head coach, it's not just the coordinators, it's not just the GM. In some way, shape, or form, it's everybody. And that's what happens when you're bad. Everybody's got a hand in it. I don't know what the short-term answer is, because you can get to the end of the season and you can blow the whole thing up, but then you're probably guaranteeing 3 or 4 more years of bad football, while whoever comes in, trades Dexter Lawrence and trades Kayvon Thibodeau and trades Brian Burns and blows up the roster. And we watch Malik Neighbors walk away in free agency in a couple years and go play for the Commanders. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think there's one reason for this whole mess.
I would agree with that. But, the biggest concern for me is why players are regressing. Like, for example, last year, Tyler Nubin looked like he might become a good player for them. And he's been terrible this year. Let's call it for what it is. Drew Phillips looked like he would become a good player for them, and he's regressing a little bit as well. Deonte Banks as a rookie looked promising, and he hasn't been the same since. That to me would point to coaching. It can't all be the players, can it?
No, it can't. It can't all be the players, Patty. And what that points to is, look, do the players trust what they're being taught? Okay. Do they trust what they're being taught? Are they being used the best way that they can be used? Are the best players being put on the field? And if they're not being put on the field, why aren't they being put on the field? Who's making that decision? But I think that what you see when guys start to make mistakes like that, Patty, is, do they trust the technique they're being taught? Do they trust the guys around them? Do they freelance? Do they pay attention to the details the way that they should, if they're not 100% sold on what they're being taught? And maybe that's partially on the player, maybe that's partially on the coach, but it's not good. So I do think, and the other thing is, you wonder, the Giants did change secondary coaches this year. They did change from Jerome Henderson and Mike Trier to Marquand Manuel and Jeff Burris. Are they being taught differently? Are they having to learn new things? So, is there a learning curve, from these young guys? Are they basically starting over from scratch like they were rookies again? So it's tough.
Yeah, it is indeed. Now, Ed, on a bigger note, do you sense at all that Brian Daboll is maybe losing the locker room a little bit?
Patty, I get asked, as I'm sure you do, what's the cause of all these penalties? What's the cause of all these turnovers? What's the cause of the quote unquote lack of discipline on the field? And honestly, I think it's some of the same thing I just talked about with Drew Phillips and Tyler Nubin and all that. If guys aren't completely bought in to what they're being taught, if they're not completely bought in to the message that's being received, it's been 2.5 years since the Giants have been good, Patty. There have to be players in that locker room when Brian Daboll speaks there, and when Joe Schoen, comes and speaks to them, whenever that happens. But there have to be players in the room going, it's been a long time, and these things keep happening. Do these guys have the answers to how to fix this? Do they have the answers to how to help us? And I think some of it is, if you're not believing what you're hearing, maybe you freelance a little bit, maybe you don't pay attention to detail as much as you should, maybe you're not quite as locked in that Wednesday or Thursday meeting as you'd like to be. And all of those things, Patty, all of those things, maybe you also sit there and you wait for something bad to happen on Sunday. And all of those things lead to pressing. They lead to maybe not fulfilling your assignment the way that you should fulfill it. Maybe it leads to this sense of, well, if I do my job and I fill this gap it's not my problem if I funnel the running back over to the cornerback and the cornerback can't make the tackle. Instead of saying, well, maybe I should get off my block and go help the cornerback. It's the cornerback's job to make the tackle. So I've done my job. So I think it, but I do think, I just think a lot of it comes from whether you continue to believe in what you're hearing.
The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. My guest today is Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. And be sure to keep it here all week on Locked On Giants. Tomorrow we have Crossover Thursday with Lou DiBiase, host of Locked On Eagles. And then, of course, on Friday, we will have the wrap-up of the Giants and Eagles. All right, Ed, let's talk about the not-so-distant future now. The Eagles are coming in. I haven't looked at the spread, but I could imagine they're probably favored by at least a touchdown, if not more. The Eagles have owned the Giants basically the last several games. If the Giants get blown out, do you anticipate John Mara, Steve Tisch, or even Brian Daboll making any kind of change to shake things up a little bit, given that the team will now have 10 days before their next game?
Well, Patty, look, it is that 10-day break provides an opportunity to make some sort of a change, if they get blown out, if it's deemed necessary. And look, it's going to get ugly at MetLife Stadium the second half of the year. We've already heard reports about, planes being hired to fly over the stadium. I wouldn't be surprised if there's more Eagles fans in the stadium Thursday night than there are Giants fans. And if things continue the way that they are, that's just going to be the same way the rest of the season. At some point, you have to make a change, if only, even if it's just a short-term change, even if it ends up being just window dressing, if it ends up just being sacrificing somebody, just to try to salvage something and to try to avoid some of that ugliness, to try to sort of placate the fan base a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I've wondered if Brian Daboll could be in danger in mid-season, but I don't think so. I've said so many times, Patty, that the Giants they're looking for reasons to keep Daboll because they don't want to do to Jackson Dart what they did to Daniel Jones. They don't want to put him in that spin cycle. But could there be changes on the coaching staff? Could there be changes on the defensive side of the ball? There are all sorts of gnashing of teeth about the fact that the defense isn't what the Giants expected it to be, and the defense can't catch passes. The defense can't give Darius Slayton better hands, but maybe there's changes on that side of the ball.
So would you agree that Shane Bowen is probably the most likely, or that the low-hanging fruit, if you will, that if a change is made, that he's probably the guy that's going to go first?
Well, it's not going to be Mike Kafka.
Yeah.
It's certainly not going to be Kafka, not the guy who's in Jackson Dart's ear calling the plays every single week. They're not going to do that. So yeah, I mean, it would have to be, if you want to call it low-hanging fruit, it would have to be, and let's be real about Shane Bowen. I think Shane's a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think Shane understands defense. I think he knows what he wants. And it's not that he is a bad football coach, but I think you've had to wonder ever since from day one when Shane Bowen was hired, was he the right guy for the defense that the Giants had? Because the Giants had to change their scheme for him. They had to change, they had to change their alignment from him. They've vastly changed the way that they played, and he still doesn't. What he wants to do still doesn't completely match the personnel that they have, and that's an issue. And figuring out how to play Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Brian Burns at the same time is an issue without one of them playing out of position. So Bowen's got to be the low hanging fruit. If there's a sacrificial lamb, it's got to be him, I would think.
But here comes the challenge, if you will. If Brian Daboll is retained, and I think he makes it through the rest of the year. I'd be surprised, regardless of how bad it gets, unless, the locker room completely turns on him. I'd be shocked if Daboll gets fired. So that being said, if the Giants turn in another clunker of a season, who are you going to attract, knowing that next year could be it for Brian Daboll? I mean, it's basically the same challenge he had a couple of years ago when he was looking for a new defensive coordinator.
Absolutely. And this is the problem, Patty. I supported the idea of keeping Shane and Daboll, entering this year, but this becomes the problem when you have a struggling head coach is who wants to work with this guy? Who wants to come in and, assistant coaches, the life, Patty. If they get to stay in one place for 3, 4, 5 years, that's a lot. It's a vagabond existence because these guys, they land in one place, the head coach gets fired, the head coach decides changes need to get made, and 2 years later they're looking for a job in another city. They don't want to do it to themselves if they don't have to. The guys with choices don't have to. The guys that everybody wants don't have to. The guys that are getting 6 or 7 interviews and can pick their jobs don't have to. But the guys who are like, I really want one more chance at being a coordinator, or I've never had a chance at being a coordinator, and this is my only shot. That winds up being the guys that you get a chance to pick from. And I think I said to you off air, this was one of the problems with Pat Shurmur's regime, with Pat Shurmur's tenure as Giants head coach. Pat was a nice guy, but everybody knew that Pat had been a terrible head coach in Cleveland. Nobody was excited about the idea of coming to New York to work with Pat Shurmur. And that became difficult for the Giants to hire good coaches. And you're in that same situation with Brian Daboll after this year. I know the Giants don't want to put Jackson Dart back in that spin cycle, but it's a hard situation because as you said, Patty, if you're the best defensive coordinator candidate out there, is the New York Giants job the best one you can get with a coach who's had 3 straight bad seasons and may not survive another one? Probably not.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, also, Ed, we got to talk about Joe Schoen's role in this because, we can't ignore what has gone down here. I mean, it's a question, I think, of which came first, the chicken or the egg. What's been the biggest problem? Shane, when he made these draft picks, the Drew Phillips, the Tyler Newbins, the Deontay Banks, there was joy in the land of the Giants, so to speak. But these guys have, regressed. Some of Joe Schoen's decisions regarding, guys he's let walk out the door, guys he's brought in, salary cap management, the cap management has just been terrible. At what point do you say, okay, you got to really give some consideration as to whether Joe survives?
Patty, I think Joe probably has more runway or a higher likelihood. I mean, if I was a Las Vegas odds maker, I would give Joe better odds of staying than I would Brian. If this year continues the way that it's going, because I think that the Giants at heart are still a conservative organization. They just blew this whole thing up from top to bottom 4 years ago. Do they really want to blow up the whole organization again, which means the entire front office, or a big chunk of the front office, is going to change? A big chunk of the scouting staff is going to change. All the processes that they put in place are going to change. Not that the processes are leading them to proper decisions or good results, but I'm not sure that John and Steve Tisch are going to want to do that. But it certainly would be justifiable if they said this isn't working. Look, the 2022 draft, aside from Kayvon, is a black hole. The 2023 draft is mostly a black hole. I don't have it in front of me, but I can't think of any players from the 2023 draft who have been what the Giants expected them to be. There's some of those guys are on the roster. Some of those guys are playing. John Michael Schmitz, for example, but and he's okay. He's a starting center, but he's not what they expected him to be. Tay Banks, clearly not what they expected him to be. And the killer is that the Giants made a trade up to get Tay Banks and gave up a resource when they clearly didn't have to. They clearly didn't have to trade up and give up that mid-round pick, to do that, to go get Tay Banks. But yeah, you can argue there's so many roster decisions. Even this year, Patty, you look at, I always say, in one off season, you cannot fill every need. Okay. You cannot fix every problem. But you look at the wide receiver mess that the Giants are in right now. And the only thing they added to the wide receiver room was Lil Jordan Humphrey, who they refused to bring off the practice squad, or refused to last week anyway. They counted on the idea that better quarterback play would make the wide receivers better. And now that you have a rookie quarterback without the star wide receiver, you're in a situation where who are the playmakers that can help Jackson Dart navigate his rookie season? I don't know who they are, because Darius Slayton's a good player and a great guy, but Darius Slayton's not a number one. He might not even be a number two. Wandale Robinson's a great guy, and Wandale Robinson has a certain skill set, but he can't be your primary pass catcher either. Can Theo Johnson be that guy? And is that good enough? I don't know. But so many things that you look at from a roster construction, from a cap management perspective, you can certainly justify moving on from Joe at the end of the season if you want to do that.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go, while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked on Giants. You've got Patricia Traina and Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. And Ed, given that the roster is what it is there anything that the Giants can do to fix the roster at this point? I mean, I look at it, and the first thing I would do at this point is maybe see if I couldn't move Russell Wilson out of here and get a draft pick, start stocking up on assets. But one of the things I talked about on my show yesterday, and I wrote about it this morning also on New York Giants on SI, this rotation idea at cornerback opposite of Paulson Adebo it's got to stop. What are your thoughts regarding some of the things, the quick fixes, if you will, the Giants can make on this roster, given that, it is kind of what it is?
Well, it's interesting, Patty. The cornerback thing, Shane Bowen said earlier this week, he said guys earn what they get. And if guys earn what they get, why is Tay Banks getting any snaps? Because he's a penalty waiting to happen. He's a completion waiting to happen. Anytime he lines up, anytime he comes out on the field, the opposing offense knows that the Giants are in man-to-man. They're in man coverage because, as much as I like Tay, it's when has Tay proven that he can play zone and that he can communicate, with the guys around him and figure out his responsibilities. I think the one time they were in zone week 4 when Tay was on the field ended up in a 36-yard touchdown pass. But, and I hate, Patty, I go back to Jerry Reese and Eric Flowers. Ben McAdoo wanted to move Eric Flowers off left tackle for 2 years. You know it, and I know it. And Eric Flowers stayed at left tackle for the New York Giants for, 3 full years? Because Jerry Reese was banging the table saying, I drafted this kid to play left tackle, and I don't care what anybody says, I'm going to prove that I was right. Okay? And that hurt the Giants for 2 years. And, if the kid's not the best player, if Cordale Flott is better, and Cordale Flott is clearly better, Cordale Flott's still a 23 or 24-year-old kid. In a lot of years, he'd just be coming out of college. A lot of guys come out of college at Flott's age right now. And if he's the best player, he should be playing, period. If Evan Neal's not good enough to play, then find somebody that wants him and collect a draft pick. If Jalen Hyatt's not good enough to play, and when he is on the field, you just ignore him because he's just a body out there and you don't throw him the ball, then get a draft pick and start over. If somebody will give you something for Russ, you've got Jameis Winston. So move on, collect the draft pick. And that's another thing when we talk about Joe is he's been very reticent. And I don't know if some of that comes from John Mara, because I know John hates to, quote unquote, give up on seasons by trading guys at the deadline. But Joe's been very reticent to trade guys at the deadline because I get it. Every general manager wants his price. Okay. But whether it's your price or the price somebody else is willing to give you, getting something for Azeez Ojulari would have been better than getting nothing. Getting something in return for Saquon Barkley a couple of years ago would have been better than getting nothing. Whoever the guy you want to talk about might be, getting something is better than getting nothing. And controlling where they go is better than getting nothing. So I don't know, Patty. I don't know. It's tough. It's just a hard, it's a mess. And like I said at the top, it's from the front office all the way down through.
Ed, final question for you. Given how devastating that loss was last week to the Saints, because I think the Giants went in there feeling pretty good coming off the win against the Chargers, and then that loss was very deflating. Can they recover from that the rest of the way, or do you feel like it's a sense of here we go again? We're heading down the tubes.
I know how the fan base feels, Patty. I
Yeah,
know how
I
the
do
fan
too.
base feels. I know that I have not wanted to go anywhere near the comments section at Big Blue View lately. Hello to your dog, by the way. But look, I think it's got to be difficult for them to recover from that. Most of them have been through this before. There's a lot of guys in that locker room who have never really experienced winning with the New York Giants. This is what they know. You know, they know 3 or 4 win seasons, and they know, being out of the playoffs before the end of October, or maybe even before before October's even halfway over. I think it's very difficult. Like I said, it's anything can happen, Patty, but I think it's very difficult right now. For me, maybe it's about how excited are these guys about playing for Jackson Dart, about giving him a chance, about not letting him down. Jackson Dart took accountability that he didn't have to take the other day because that loss in New Orleans wasn't on him. He fumbled the ball one time, and he threw 2 interceptions that whatever. I don't think either one of them was really a bad interception. One was actually on Bo Collins, and the other one was a 4th down that just had to be thrown somewhere. And so, it got picked off, whatever. But, if they believe in Jackson Dart, those guys in the locker room will continue to try to give effort. They'll continue to try to give him something. But it's entirely possible. We've seen it before. You and I have both seen it. You can walk through a locker room and you can tell when guys are checked out. And it's entirely possible that's what we're going to see.
Ed, we got to hope that there is some kind of a miracle to salvage the season, because the fan base is down. I get the sense that the mood is a little bit down, and we still have quite a way to go before we get through the end of the season. But, we'll see what happens. I mean, if the Giants can at least be competitive against the Eagles, even if they lose, keep it competitive. And I can't believe I'm saying that, because, this is what it's come to. Keep it competitive and build off of that if you can. But if it's another blowout, I suspect things are going to get even uglier.
There are no moral victories, Patty, but if you fight, if you make it a game into the 4th quarter, if you look like a football team, if you're not shooting yourself in the foot constantly, then you have something to feel good about.
Yeah. Well, we can only keep our fingers crossed, right? So, All right. Ed, want to thank you for coming on. Giant fans, want to thank you for tuning in. As always, thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. The NFL season is finally here. So for your next listen, get a double dose of Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler the Madman Rowland gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Giant fans, tomorrow it'll be Crossover Thursday with Lou DiBiase of Locked On Eagles. So until then, we will see you next time.